Alrighty, I'm just gonna make sure and double check that everything is up and running. Um, Wait a second. When this works, okay, this works. I'm gonna try and monitor the chat, but yep, I'll get started in a moment. So remember, you guys, for those of you that remember, basically, um, this is a live broadcast. Everything on here is completely unscripted. This week got an interesting topic, and I'll try and monitor the chat. But basically, here, let me switch back. So I'm going to try and monitor the chat, but essentially this week we're going to talk about the 2025 Canadian federal budget. For those of you that don't know, and I'll give a bit of background context, but the Canadian federal budget is essentially every year, I believe in the spring and in the fall, there's usually the Canadian government, basically the prime minister and his government will get prime minister will get together with his finance with the parliamentary budget officer, and they'll basically come up with a budget. They'll look at the books. They'll come up with a budget for the what they're proposing, and then they go to the House of Commons in Canada, and we vote on it. Um, and let's just say if it doesn't pass, that means you can lose. Basically, it can be a vote of no confidence. The vote of confidence is called on the budget. If the vote of confidence fails, then that leaves room for the official opposition party here in Canada to go ahead and then take a vote of no confidence to basically call an election essentially, or sometimes the prime minister will call an election. There's a it's all. I mean, I won't get into that. That's a whole political discussion on who called an election when, but just kind of give a bit of perspective. Before we dive in, you guys probably noticed we haven't had a live stream or Ronnie Bro uploaded in a while. I've been traveling. I've had a lot of some stuff, family related stuff, but I'm gonna try and get it up and running in the coming week or so. Like we're gonna be back on a regular schedule. Again, for those of you tuning in, basically our Thursday night session is essentially I'm gonna take a topic unscripted, and we're gonna pull it apart for the next 30 to 40 minutes and just kind of analyze it together. If you have comments, questions, don't forget to feel free to leave them in the chat. If there's a topic you want discussed in the future, feel free. And I'd be happy to possibly cover it in the next in another session. So without further ado, hold on. Let me pull up the budget. 2020, 2025. So here, I'll just kind of share my screen to show you what I'm looking at. But basically, there's been a little, for those of you that follow Canadian politics, there's been a bit of a controversy. So I think, yeah, this was it I was looking at before. It's like a 400-page document. I'm gonna kind of, I'm gonna, I wanna, I'm gonna go into the, I'll open up the document later to show you, but to kind of, because we'll pull apart some pieces. This is like a high level that the government of Canada posts, but we can even pull apart the PDF version. Basically, or we'll go back to the dashboard. But this is a bit of a controversial budget because I remember during the last election several months back, we were supposed to get a budget and we were supposed to hear more. That Carney was kind of Mark Carney, our current Prime Minister of Canada. Um, he was kind of when he came on, everyone said, "Well, he's an ex-central banker. He was governor of the Bank of England. He was an advisor to Trudeau. He was appointed as an advisor and as an advisor in the 2020. He was responsible for handling for Canadian economic handling or handling of the Canadian economy, I should say, during the 2020 COVID era." And then, of course, he's advised Trudeau up until the very end, up until the very last days. And so there's a lot of controversy, and he was also late. He came across in his campaign as trying to convey himself as this savior. He's fiscally responsible. He's gonna take head on a lot of the economic challenges that we've seen, but then he just stayed silent, which is kind of and just looking at this, I'll kind of give my understanding of this and I'll kind of give my what this means for investors, what it means for Canadian investors actually. But what I think is interesting about this whole thing is it's almost as if the entire time it's almost like a hype up. It's like almost like they're hyping up how great Canada is, but then and how great position, such a great economic position we're in. But then the numbers don't really match that because actually I should bring this up too before we dive deep into it. But for months we've been told the government's in trouble. We're running out of money, and just looking at the numbers here, something doesn't add up. These are like they're cutting some places and then spending more what they more. And the expression I always hear, like, you don't pull out a loan from the bank when you default on your mortgage. It's just bad investment advice or financial advice in general. But I think it was Francois Jacques can PBO. Basically, where is it? Yeah. So basically, the Francois Jacques, this guy, he's the parliamentary budget officer, interim parliamentary budget officer, and a couple months in October, he'd said, here's the line. He'd said we're gonna have a 51.7. Basically it's gonna increase from last year. The budget, I mean, the deficit, the national deficit was 51.7. This year he's projecting it to be 68.5. Here, let me pull out a calculator and I'll show you it's double digits. I don't remember the exact figure, but I remember it was a double digit. It was like 30 something percent increase. That's crazy. 51.7 divided by 68.5 minus 1. Sorry, not 30, not 30 something. It's 24.5%. Yeah, so it's 24.5%. That's pretty scary in the sense. That is kind of pretty scary. I mean, pretty scary in the sense, and I'll get to why this. They're projecting, and he said it was what was the word he used? What was the word he used? Anyways, I'm blanking on the word he used. There was a specific word that I remember he used, which kind of put it in perspective, and I think it was perfect, the word he used. But he basically, I think it was precipice. He said we're in a precipice, and essentially Canada's in trouble. We're spending too much money, and we're and I mean, in part, Canada's famous for its social programs, and we'll get to that in a moment. But but I mean, he's basically going on and on how he went. He was there was this whole address that he made, that when he was addressing he was addressing a committee, basically a committee hearing, saying like we're in trouble basically. And then this comes out and the tone changes. And I'll just kind of high level, but they're saying, well, first of all, that we have the lowest net debt to GDP of the G7 countries. I double checked that. I mean, that's correct. I mean, I'm not gonna start disagreeing with Stats Can with the sorry IMF. Um, like, as I went to the IMF website and actually found it. But then we're talking about, but then what he's saying is he wants to cut he wants to cut certain spending, but then throw it into infrastructure and capital investments. And and then you can see here, like, this is his 5-year forecast. They're talking about a $280 billion total dollar value on the Canadian taxpayer money going towards infrastructure, productivity and competitiveness, defense and security, and housing. Now, defense and security I can get behind, but I think it's defense and security. I mean, that's one of the few things. I think Canada's military capabilities, we we have I think we have fallen behind. I think it's more important nowadays. I think the infrastructure is important, but I mean, it's for what it's worth, it sounds all nice on the outside, but what doesn't make sense and what doesn't add up is, so, for example, they acknowledge so they're saying, so first of all, this goes back to the noise what we were hearing like a month ago when they were saying it's terrible. It's probably what they're referring to. The cost of living remains high, unemployment, and I mean, even if you've been following the news in Canada over the past month, I was surprised too in the Globe and Mail of all newspapers. I saw articles about more and more a growing number of Canadians believe immigration and unemployment is rising too fast, abnormally fast. And I know in the past few years, I think the figure last time I checked, the figure was here. Let me double check. Um, estimated number of, what do you call it? Foreign visa holders in Canada to date. Um, yeah, let's just go to government of Canada. Why not? So yeah. Um, where is it? I can't find the number. I'm gonna, maybe I'll find it and put it in the comments. So but anyways, I forgot. I have to find the number. I can find it after and put it in the comments maybe. But it was about what months ago when I had heard the number, and so again, it may have changed. So don't hold me to it. But I remember months ago, I saw an article in I think it was the National Post. I think it was the National Post or some other newspaper that it's maybe I can double check that after. But there were 1.5 million people, almost 1.5 million people in Canada on visas that aren't Canadian citizens. And I know from like I have personal I know from personal experience because I witnessed it. But I know you also hear about it too in universities. Um, these are people that are using Canadian social programs. So it creates that, and I'm not going to turn this into a whole talk on immigration. I'm going to try and remain apolitical. I'm talking about it from the economic perspective, but it's almost like in the 1920s after the First World War, um, they staggered the Canadian military when they were coming home, so that they'd come home over a 5, 6, 7 year period. 5, 6, sorry about that, my phone, over a 5, 6 year period. And the idea behind that was, um, you don't want to bombard I mean, they didn't have the extensive social infrastructure we have now, but you don't want to bombard the system. In other words, you don't want to be in a situation where you have you suddenly have mass unemployment because the economy is kind of like an equilibrium. Let's say you have 100,000 jobs, right? And then 50,000 people go off to war. They don't come. They go away, or they 50,000 people go away, right? And then the economy contracts because there's fewer people, or unless I say contracts, but theoretically more people will come into the labor force. Maybe younger people will come in. At the time, it was the women who took over the labor force in the First World War, the manufacturing and the industry, the industrial infrastructure, like to take over the industrial infrastructure, the farming and all that sort of stuff. Then after the war, the women don't want to leave the jobs, and the men now all need jobs. So what happens is there's a period where the economy is trying to adjust to create new jobs, and so unemployment is temporarily higher because you can't just fire all the women and give the jobs back to the men. You have to expand. That's how economies of scale expand when as it's supply and demand even within the industry. So like and I mean that's the whole other economics discussion I won't go deep into, but and and then this kind of leads to uncertainty. So let me find it. What was the global uncertainty index? Let me find it. So where is it? World uncertainty index. Here we go. The world uncertainty. Yeah, I found out about this the other day. This is interesting. From what I understand, it's just charting GDP weighted average index, GDP weighted average. So it's basically charting world uncertainty. It's percent of word uncertain, or it's variant in economist intelligence unit country reports. Basically, I came across this on the Government of Canada website. They were referring to this, and I thought it was interesting because I think this is fairly. I think it was in the budget that I saw it. Some document that I saw, but basically it tracks, and you see like more. And let's go back. Maybe there's a way to zoom out to. No, there's no way to zoom out. Maybe I thought maybe it would go back farther, but basically, I like, for example, like I said, actually, I think it's more nuanced because like, the war in the Middle East is kind of ended. We're kind of seeing I mean, it's not completely over, we're still seeing some flare up, but things have calmed down relatively. So again, trade is starting to run trade's running more smoothly in the area as opposed to months ago when you had, months and months ago when you had the Houthis and you had you had Iran and all the flare ups there, and then of course you have the tensions in the Strait of Malacca or the Straits of Taiwan, which is again ongoing tension there, and again that contributes to this uncertainty. So like there's all these premiums on these premiums that I guess businesses that are involved in trade that are tied to trade to tied to things that are traded or exported like commodities or manufactured goods or retailed like manufactured goods for lack of better terms, and so that's kind of and so that's kind of leads me to my next point, which is kind of like because of all this trade, it's not to the extent of COVID era, but you've almost seen you've almost seen trade can kind of slow down or take longer to take place because of just the navigation, circumnavigation. I mean, going instead of for months, instead of going through the Red Sea, it wasn't safe, so they had to go around the Cape Horn of Africa, um, and I mean, you can make the argument. Yes, it's a bit. Maybe I'm going too granular. You can make the argument that that maybe some of these companies, if they're especially if they're smaller companies, businesses, like a single business in Ottawa that buys French cheese or whatever, or French or manufactures something in China, it's not even going to make a dent in the GDP, but on a large scale, um, just heightened global uncertainty, and again within the G7. Um, we've had in the G7 countries, to put it plainly, we've had a rough, at least in North America and Canada and the US, we've had a rough time for the past several months, with volatility, but also with what's the word? It's been ve- it's been very it's like with inflation and unemployment, and again we're seeing some people have chalked this up to a recessionary period, at least in Canada, and then. There's the oil prices. The other thing I want to highlight was like the oil prices and lower and more volatile. I want to address this. I mean, it's adding pressure on exports and revenue. I think it's a bit more nuanced. I think the oil prices are lower because we've seen for the past 9 months, we've seen OPEC virtually raise its production gradually, and I think it's raise OPEC and raise OPEC. I think it was OPEC raise for production of crude oil over past 9 months. See, I mean, I can verify that stat as well. Um, but yeah, because I remember I saw that somewhere on the in the EIA that I can pull up the link to the source. But I remember hearing that, I remember reading that for the past 9 months, OPEC had increased its production. And what's and I mean, obviously, when you increase the supply of any commodity, it puts downward pressure on the price. That's the fundamentals of economics, and and so you have this kind of weird play, and also I guess the U.S. and now and the U.S. and is ramping up production. So record high. I think I remember reading too that were record high shale production in U.S. shale production um, shale production in like and exporting. Um, and again, that's kind of I think that's also a play by the U.S. to kind of to increase its oil again to increase its oil production, down pressure on prices, help the consumers have cheaper gas essentially. Um, and again with OPEC, they now want to halt. They want to lower production after 9 consecutive months. They want to essentially lower the production of oil, and again because they want to put upward pressure. A significant amount of their portfolio is in critical minerals and is in oil and gas, so it makes sense. Um, and again, the volatility. So I think that's the play behind the lower oil prices. Volatility. I would just chalk that up again to the geopolitical risk premium. Insurance goes up when geopolitical risk goes up, and you also got shipping routes taking longer. You have the costs. Longer shipping routes means higher operational costs. Um, and and I think they highlighted this too. This is important because Canada has the newest projects are LNG terminals. They have three, one in Kitimat, another one they're opening another one nearby, and then a come online in 27 and 20, and another one in 2028. Um, I talked about that a while back in one of my if you follow my Commodity Pulse, by the way, I have a weekly newsletter, the weekly Commodity Pulse. I talk about all this stuff. Um, every Monday we talk about we hash out the geopolitical policy and cross commodity analysis. We look at it'll be kind of thematic articles, and then of course on Fridays we take questions and we answer questions from the readers. I'll put the link in the comments section. But yeah, sorry, this is where I saw this is where I saw, yeah, I was right. So, and and I guess they're kind of, this is where I find it, but this is the thing I find kind of interesting about this budget is they kind of make a big deal about tariffs. They mentioned the tariffs, they mentioned COVID-19, and ironically too, you know that it's funny they mentioned this because I mean, get signed. So here you see this 2020 I mean, around this time is when Carney took his place as Trudeau's economic advisor. Then again, now they're saying like, oh, the global uncertainty is going up, and it makes sense. U.S. tariffs because like Trump changes his mind on tariffs quite frequently. Um, they're on and they're off, and so anyways, that's that. Anyways, that's all. I won't get into that. I think there was if you go and read the actual document though, like he does talk significant he talks about resource nationalism. They talk about they want to build infrastructure. And what I find interesting about that is Carney's very quick to criticize Trump. And I'm not saying this to pick sides, Carney or Trump, whoever you like, not important here. But it's the double standard that I think we've seen now with this budget, which is we're saying we're boasting about how Canada needs to be national, and that we need to have resource nationalism. We need to friendshore, and we need to reshore all our like production of energy. Fine, but then don't criticize the U.S. for trying to do the same thing. I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy there. I just wanted to mention that. But where was it? And again, this is what I mean. Like they kept sprinkling in these like that's great and all, but like get to the point. And yeah, it's all this build, empower, protect stuff. I think a lot of this again is just trying to. This is the highlight intro. This is like the introduction to it. I'll go in a minute and I'll go talk a little. Maybe we can look deeper into the document. It's a 400-page document. I had skimmed it. I read a few of the sections, but unless you got time to read 400 pages, but it's an interesting read. Like you pick whatever whatever you're curious about. Um, here, yeah. So they're projecting $60 billion over 5 years, but and they're projecting they're going to save money. But where was it? Oh yeah, here we go. So these were the figures they gave. But now they plan to spend. What was it? Like $60 billion. That's not going to cover the bill. That's going to pretty much. That's This is pretty much going to take your 5 billion short of running up the money you just saved, and then still got your infrastructure and your productivity over and competitiveness over the next 5 years. And this is interesting. What I find interesting in this is infrastructure again. Infrastructure, I understand. Canada needs to stay competitive. Defense, I understand. We have NATO contributions. And I will say too, I think this is pretty generous considering for $30 billion, considering that NATO had a 5% of GDP rule and then ruled in the last NATO meeting here. I can pull it up. NATO 5% contribution. Yeah, so like if you go NATO, I think 30 billion is pretty generous considering that I think that's so. What is Canada's GDP? I'm curious to see. I'm going to verify that number actually. 2.41 trillion. Let's do the math. Let's see. Calculator. 2.241 times 0.05. I don't know. I don't know how they got to 30. Maybe that's sorry. Maybe that's over 5. Maybe that's over. Maybe that's. I'm curious. Verify that after. Oh, that's in 2024, and then USD. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not. Let's see. These are 2024 numbers. Maybe again, that's another thing. If you're interested, it's not important for my point. My point is, I think this is very generous considering 5%, and it is important in the sense that like they say, 1.5% of it's going to be, as their wording is, um, or is it 5%? Here we go. 1.5%. Critical infrastructure, defense networks ensure civil preparedness and resilience, innovative strength, defense, industrial base, and I believe is in cover. What I believe is included in this is critical mineral infrastructure. A lot of these, and that's another part of it too. The infrastructure that 100, I think it's 110 billion on 115 billion over 5 years on infrastructure. From what I understand, that includes they want to develop natural resource sector, which will again complement this because a lot of the modern defense systems require critical minerals, and that China has. Like, I think it's like some reports go from 70% to nine as high as 93% was the highest figure I ever saw estimated of Chinese dominance over the critical mineral processing infrastructure. Meaning the Belt and Road Initiative, to put it bluntly, is very successful for them as a business, as a money churner, um, and control to get control. Um, Now, all right, here we go. Major infrastructure, the 21st century. So they want to do again trade and transform infrastructure, indigenous communities, municipal infrastructure. I'm not going to comment on this. It's a bit of a controversial topic for those of you that aren't Canadian watching. Um, so like health, core public infrastructure, and where is it? They want to do quantum AI, quantum and electric vehicles. They want to do regional economic development. And you see, they talk a lot about what they don't talk about too, though, is maybe like what I find interesting. Again, I keep saying what I find interesting, but there's a lot of things I find interesting about this, honestly. But something I find interesting about this too is that they said they're cutting the carbon rebate, or they're cutting the carbon what is it? They're cutting the carbon tax, I believe. Mentioned here. Yeah, canceling divisive consumer carbon price, cutting gas prices approximately 18 cents per liter in most provinces and territories. Um, cut taxes for 22 million middle class middle class. I mean, it's debatable. It's debatable. There's the whole tax debate. Who pays more taxes, the middle, the upper, or the lower class people? A lot of people. I would argue, there's yes, some people take advantage of tax breaks. Uh, I don't think it's really a solid argument to start saying that the middle class and the lower class pay more of their fair share than the upper class. I think it's there's certain tax breaks that don't apply. Yes, there's certain rules that don't apply, but I don't think it's fair to say that. And what concerns me about this budget, another thing is so they're cutting a lot and then they're spending a lot. But who pays for the almost trip? Like, let's do the math. Like 25, 30, like say he said $60 billion. They say $60 billion, right? So let's pull up a calculator. 60 minus 25 minus 30 minus 115 minus 110. Negative $220 billion, increasing the deficit over the 5-year period, approximately, give or take. That's pretty concerning. And the question rises, who's going to pay for all this? Who foots the bill for this? And I think the answer is simple: the Canadian, um, the Canadian taxpayer does, the Canadian taxpayer base. And I think what a lot of younger people need to realize, I think what the reason I talk so much, I decided to dedicate an entire live stream to this is I think it's so important. I think younger generation, my generation, Gen Zs, even the younger millennials and even the Gen Xers don't are either not paying attention or they need to pay more attention to the to the impact that a lot of these decisions. A lot of them are looking, oh, free stuff. We're getting all this free social infrastructure from the government. But central plan governments rarely, if never, plan out the way they're supposed to. And I would hope too, I'd be curious, maybe that's another investigative thing, but like which companies are being used. That's another politically charged, so I'm not going to get into it, but like which companies are being used to build this, because there was a lot of talk about Cameco, not Cameco, Westinghouse, I believe the name of the country, is the name of the company, Westinghouse. Yeah, yeah, I think it was Westinghouse or something, and another one was Westinghouse was one of the companies, and it that was involved in developing infrastructure in Alberta, um, and what's interesting about that too is Westinghouse is also has a one of the major shareholders in Westinghouse, I believe, is Brookfield, and Brookfield, as we know, is our prime minister's former employer. So there's a lot of questions. I'm not going to get into that. I've heard of some talk about that, but I won't get into that. I just thought I'd mention it. Um, and I'll say like it begs the question: Are Canadian taxpayers being looked out for? Is it like I would hope that any sort of infrastructure that he's planning on building or that the government plans on building has whenever you develop real estate or or make a large investment, there's recourse for the Canadian taxpayer that if these don't pan out, um, there can be some form of a compensation that the Canadian taxpayers just don't see their hard-earned money evaporate evaporate after they're collected from taxes for poor management. I mean, a good example of this is the EV sector. I was talking to someone the other day, and they had pointed out that there were there were, I think it was, um, what was it, Canadian EVs? Yeah, this was This what I googled went out. I think this is an example. So like, yeah, calls out again and again, like it's Northvolt. But to put it in perspective, um, just show you here, like at this point, put I feel like Northvolt was like a company. They put, what was the figure? Yeah, $4 billion in incentives, including 1.3 billion. They basically gave billions of dollars of our taxpayer money to this company, and then suddenly just disappeared. Projects, manufacturer, we're going to build a large EV factory in Quebec, and and the company went bankrupt. And it begs the question: are they doing due diligence with our on the investments they're making with our taxpayer money? I mean, that's why I'm so critical of this. When you see stories like this after a big hype up like on it like here, like it raises the question. And I think the how and I'll say I'll end with this. I don't want to drag on, but like the housing sector is a big thing. Um, and this goes back to ties back to immigration. Ties back. I think I saw too in the newspaper earlier this morning that they're planning. I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but they were talking about reducing the number of. I think it was cutting in half was the number. Was what I read, or that they're cutting it. They want to cut in half the number of visas they're offering for people to come here. And I mean, I mean, Canada needs immigration. We need immigrants. We need people coming in the country. Our birth rates aren't as high enough to sustain us in the long run, but we need to build infrastructure. And then don't forget, it's not just housing, it's the social infrastructure as well. And they're using the social infrastructure and they're not necessarily paying taxes because so it's essentially they're getting a free ride on the Canadian taxpayer for all their socialized healthcare needs, basically, or social enterprise needs. So, and I mean and again, that's another politically motivated discussion I won't get into in depth here, but But again, like it's talking about here, home building must nearly double from its current pace around 280,000 homes, between 400 homes per year over the next decade. That's a large number. I have two questions. Who are these companies that will be doing this? Because, oh, yeah, sorry, build homes, new federal. So yeah, I see they're from eliminating GST to first time home buyers under $1 million, launching or at under $1 million, and launching Build Canada Homes, a new federal agency that would revive. See, I don't. I think this is I don't know. Personally, I think this is a mistake. I think that there should be a bit more. I think creating a new government division. How much is that going to cost the taxpayer? Is my point. Like, so there's a lot. And again, but I think this is dangerous. I think people will look at this and think, wow, but then when you actually look at when you look at the at your paycheck at the end of the month and watch more than half of it disappear, I think some Canadians are gonna start waking up to this. Um, anyways, I can ramble on longer. I won't. I just thought it would be interesting to kind of go through. I'll just kind of show you here. If you're interested, I mean, again, this is only a 30-ish minute discussion today, but um, if you're interested, you can go to the full. This is the full budget. If you click here, it's a pretty hefty document, 493 pages, but it's got everything you would if you want to look at it. Um, but yeah, anyways, hope you enjoyed the live stream. Just a reminder. So again, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel. We will be resuming. I apologize again. We will be resuming within the next week or so. We'll be getting back. I'm gonna try and get back on schedule within the week, and we'll also be again. If you haven't checked it out, also I'll put the link below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Really help me in the YouTube algorithm, but also. Um, I also have, if you're interested in more of this deep dive analysis, we have the weekly commodity pulse, which is a newsletter publication I publish through Substack. Again, the link's gonna be in the comments. And every week, basically I have a Monday and Friday edition. Monday edition, it's Monday and Friday it's paywall. So Monday edition, we start. You get all free. All subscribers that are free. All free subscribers get access to weekly coverage of current events and how it relates and the commodity markets, supply chain, and trade dynamics, policy. Discuss geopolitics. Friday, I'll usually take answers from the audience and or questions from the audience and answer them. Um, if you subscribe, and then there's a lot more. There's lots more. Check out the Substack. There's more for premium subscribers coming soon. Our forecasts and CFTC analysis, but we have supply chain analysis. We have deeper sector analysis. We have top commodity movers where we look at technical and we also look at some fundamentals behind them. Um, every week on Fridays. So anyway, yeah, like, subscribe, turn your notifications on so you never miss an episode.